On a bright summer day, an unimaginable crime horrified California. A young girl was snatched from her neighborhood by an unknown assailant. Hundreds of officials and volunteers combed acres of farmland searching for the missing girl. The FBI soon joined the hunt, hoping that a quick response would improve the odds of finding her before her young life was extinguished.
On July 2nd, 1994, a 12-year-old girl was abducted from her home in Northern California. Based on experience, the FBI had learned the hard lessons. Act fast, search wide, enlist volunteers. But as the hours slipped by, agents also realized their chances for recovering her alive grew slim. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents and local law enforcement needed to scour miles of rugged terrain to find the girl before it was too late.
The small city of Lodi, California, is nestled in the heart of the Golden State's warm Central Valley, just south of Sacramento. It is surrounded by some of the world's richest farmland, orchards and renowned vineyards. Most who settled here found Lodi's tranquility and low crime rate preferable to the frenzied pace of larger cities. On Saturday, July 2nd, 1994, 3 of its younger residents escaped the heat of the day in front of the television. A 16-year-old girl was watching her young sister and her sister's friend. The girl's parents were away in Michigan for the long 4th of July weekend. At about 4 p.m., a visitor stopped by. A shirtless man covered in tattoos was inquiring about the house, which was posted for sale. He asked if he could come in to check out the place.
You can call the number on
The teenager told him to call the realtor's number on the sign and to make an appointment when her parents returned in a few days. The man said he didn't have a pen and asked if he could come in to write it down. Wisely, the girl refused to let him in and offered to write it down for him instead. On a piece of her father's stationery, she jotted down the realtor's number. She handed it to the stranger, who left reluctantly.
I'm sorry.
No, come on.
Hi, I'd like to go on a carry-out. A large half pepperoni.
Since it was getting close to dinner time, the older sister called to order a pizza.
Thanks, bye.
The closest takeout place was 10 minutes away.
Girls, I'm going to get a pizza. I'll be back.
The girls didn't want to leave their movie, so the teenager let them stay. She'd only be gone 20 minutes. Leaving the children alone for such a short time didn't seem too risky. Just moments after she left, the doorbell rang again.
Maybe your sister forgot her keys.
The young sister answered it.
Hi, I was here a little bit ago, a little earlier, and I talked
The shirtless man had
Give me
returned.
your phone number, and I just want to know if I can borrow a phone book.
The girl went to fetch him a phone book from the kitchen. Moments later, the older sister returned home with the pizza. She called to the younger girls, but they did not answer.
Got pizza.
With a knife to her throat, the shirtless man attacked her. He forced the teenager upstairs to a bedroom where the younger girls were already tied up. Like the others, he secured her hands and feet. None of them knew what would happen next. Trembling, the young friend felt the intruder pull the knot from her ankles. Then he dragged her out of the room. In a second bedroom down the hall, the man threw his young victim onto the bed, threatening to kill her and her friends if she screamed. He bound her feet again. Then left the room. While alone, the young girl tried to work free from her restraints. For the sisters, their situation appeared hopeless. After a few grueling moments, the friend managed to free her hands. But the bindings around the friend's legs tripped her when she tried to stand up. She heard the man's footsteps and her friend's cries coming down the hall. The girl slipped into an open closet. Dragging the younger sister, the man burst into the room.
Stand up, stand up.
He didn't see the friend lying motionless in a recess on the closet's back wall. The tattooed man had no idea where the girl could have gone. Hearing no more movement, the girl's friend risked leaving the safety of her hiding place. The intruder likely figured the child had managed to escape and call the cops. Since he had lost control of one of his 3 hostages, he decided to focus on only one. The kidnapper forced the young sister into the family's car and sped off. The girl who had hidden in the closet found the older sister in the room next door and untied her. The teenager called 911 and reported that a tattooed man had abducted her sister, taking their red sports car. The information was relayed to Lodi officers who sped to the home. A quick response was essential, since the chances of finding an abducted minor alive greatly decrease after the first 24 hours. Lodi Police Chief Larry Hansen was called in right away to take charge of the case.
The agony of having your child taken is a fear of every parent. I think it's a fear of every community. You know, we want our children to be safe, and we particularly want them to be safe in our own homes. So it is the worst type of violation that can occur to have a child kidnapped out of a home.
Officers attempted to contact the girl's parents in Michigan, but they were not immediately reachable. Their parents were vacationing in a remote cabin, so Michigan deputies were sent to inform them of their daughter's abduction. The two girls left in the house were taken to a hospital for an examination before they could be interviewed. Police dispatched all points bulletins for the sports car's license plate and a description of the missing child.
My greatest fear was that this case was going to end up like so many others, that we would have a homicide. You try not to focus on that, but you recognize time is really of the essence. And that individual kidnapped that little girl for a specific reason, a reason that we were only speculating, but he knew in his mind and heart what he was going to do. And so we were just trying to do everything we could to recover her as quickly as possible and hopefully avoid that.
The chief wasted no time in calling in the FBI. Special Agent Charles Riley of the FBI Sacramento Field Office knew he had to act quickly if there was any hope of finding the young girl.
Sometimes the kidnappings go interstate and sometimes they don't. The problem is we don't know, and if you wait until you know there's an interstate nexus to the crime, sometimes it's pretty late in the game to get good information. So we generally jump early on a kidnapping.
By 8 p.m., more than an hour after the child was taken from her home, crime scene technicians from the FBI's evidence recovery team and the California Department of Justice processed the rooms where the girls had been held captive. For the next 12 hours, they collected hairs and fibers throughout the house. Technicians also dusted surfaces for fingerprints. They hoped that trace evidence left behind could help identify the unknown perpetrator. At the hospital, the missing girl's older sister and friend, though still shaken, told a Lodi detective they had never seen their attacker before. The girls described him as 5'7", tan, and muscular with many tattoos. They also provided detail of the terrifying events that had occurred just a few hours earlier. The younger girl said that she felt scared when her friend didn't respond to her calls after she'd left the room to answer the door. The girl found her in the kitchen with a man holding a knife to her throat. Instinctively, the girl tried to protect her friend, but the man was too powerful. He forced both girls out of the kitchen to the bedrooms upstairs, and then the older girl when she arrived moments later. The girls said he threatened to kill them if they didn't do as he demanded. They feared what he might have already done to the girl who he'd taken. As the only witnesses, they would need to give more detail to a sketch artist as soon as they were released from the hospital's care. For residents of Northern California, this crime was unfortunately all too familiar. Less than a year earlier, a 12-year-old Petaluma girl named Polly Klass had also been kidnapped and was later found murdered.
Our case had such eerie similarities to the Polly Klass case. There were 3 girls in the home in our case. There were 3 girls in the home of the Polly Klass case. Both suspects were armed with a knife. Both suspects took a girl and left the home with them.
Though Polly Klass's murderer was already behind bars, police hoped that the outcome of their current case would not prove as tragic. Lodi investigators called upon the Polly Klass Foundation for help. Created after Polly's death, the foundation assists law enforcement with disseminating information on child abductions as quickly as it develops.
It was one of the first phone calls that I made. I contacted them because they have resources to assist in this type of investigation that we do not. They have their own network system. They have 24-hour gas stations and 24-hour convenient type stores that they will fax, copies of a flyer, and those will be posted so that if people are traveling through, they can be aware of this particular incident.
At the Lodi police station, the girls provided a description of the suspect to a sketch artist. As they had told police at the crime scene, Each of the perpetrator's upper arms were covered in tattoos. And in the middle of his back, the man bore the unfinished outline of a skull's face. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, a mustache, and a scruffy beard.
Okay.
Investigators sent the sketch to every law enforcement agency and media outlet in the area. 20 miles away on a desolate road in the rural area of San Joaquin County, a rancher was on his way home at about 8:30 p.m. when he noticed a brush fire in one of his pastures. Just beyond, he saw a sports car, apparently abandoned, with its doors left open. He called 911. Firemen were first to arrive on the scene. The brush fire in the arid region of Northern California can spread quickly with devastating results. They were able to contain the blaze to an isolated area before it reached the red sports car. San Joaquin Sheriff's Lieutenant Mike Padilla arrived moments later.
We received a radio call that there was a fire, and it was a suspicious fire. Fire was on scene, and there was a vehicle abandoned in the area. When we saw the car, it did fit the description that was being aired on a Be on the Lookout by Lodi Police. It was very similar to that vehicle. When we finally got close enough to read the tags on the car, we called them in to our records division. They were able to confirm that was the vehicle.
The car had apparently sparked the fire as it careened through the rancher's field before it was halted by debris. But police found no signs of her or her abductor. They could only hope that they were close by and that the girl was still alive. By 8:30 p.m. on July 2nd, 1994, an hour and a half after a girl was abducted from her Lodi, California home in a stolen car, investigators had found the vehicle in a burning pasture of rural San Joaquin County. The girl and her kidnapper were nowhere to be found. San Joaquin Sheriff's Lieutenant Mike Padilla was joined by police from neighboring Lodi and the FBI.
The Lodi lieutenant arrived and met with us on the scene. It was at that point that we determined that there's a possibility that our victim might be in the luggage area of the vehicle. Although it's a small vehicle, it would be large enough to put a small female in.
The keys were missing, so firefighters carefully cut the hatchback's lock. They heard no banging or screaming and feared what they might find. The luggage compartment was empty. Though they found nothing in or near the vehicle to indicate the subject's present whereabouts, the car had become the nexus of the search, according to FBI Special Agent Charles Riley.
We didn't know whether the victim and the subject were close to the car or their location. We were acting upon the premise that they could still be very close. Our highest concern was to find the victim safely and also to find the subject if we could.
Since the area was so remote, it was unlikely that the assailant had stolen another vehicle and left the area. Yet because he was probably on foot, there was a greater possibility that he had disposed of his 12-year-old victim in order to move more swiftly through the rugged terrain. Lodi Police Lieutenant Gerald Murray was aware that the odds of finding her alive were beginning to dwindle.
Statistically, usually a victim does not live very long once they get in a rural setting and the suspect has control, and this, like it is in this type of situation. So, you know, we were very, very concerned about her living through this experience, and basically we had to focus on what we did know. And what we did know is we had the resources, we had the training, and we had the personnel that were going to diligently search and look for this person.
By 8:45 p.m., the FBI and local police had helicopters on the scene. From above, They would help guide investigators to the girl or her abductor if they were spotted. In order to penetrate the blackness of the landscape, the pilots relied on forward-looking infrared detection, or FLIR. FLIR is a sophisticated heat-sensing device that illuminates anything radiating heat, including people or the engine of a car. On the ground, canine units were called upon for assistance. Investigators hoped they could follow the subject's scents to indicate the direction they may have headed. The dogs led the searchers into the brush, but after about a mile, the trail turned cold. It didn't take long for San Joaquin Sheriff's Lieutenant Mike Padilla to realize that to cover such a wide rural expanse, they would need far more personnel.
Although we're a larger department than Lodi, this was even too broad of an area for us to handle alone. So we activated mutual aid, which is something we do in California. We can activate as many counties as we need to receive assistance. In this case, I believe we activated 10 counties, and the response was astounding.
The San Joaquin County Sheriffs also dispatched their mobile command center bus to help coordinate the massive search. The bus would act as the field headquarters to receive and disseminate the most current information and to pass out assignments for the interagency effort. It could be moved anywhere at a moment's notice if necessary. San Joaquin sheriffs and fire departments provided road and topographical maps of the entire region. Their familiarity with the area would be an invaluable resource to assist the FBI and Lodi police in containing 2 square miles, the maximum distance they could handle with limited personnel. Their first task was to set up a perimeter, as FBI Special Agent Charles Riley recalls.
We didn't know the time frame from when the car first arrived until we were there looking for the victim and the subject. So we tried to set up a perimeter on a spot we could function on. In this case, we chose roads circumventing the area where the car was found. And unfortunately, those roads were a great distance. It was in excess of a mile in every direction around the car, and we had to try and run a perimeter to make sure no one left that area.
California Highway Patrol units, San Joaquin Sheriff's deputies, and the Lodi Police conducted rolling and stationary surveillance along major routes into and out of the area. The perimeter stretched like mile-long spokes of a wheel emanating from the abandoned car on the ranch. Several helicopters remained in the air, hoping to glimpse the young girl or the fugitive with their infrared radar. Within the perimeter, teams of searchers began to canvass the homes and ranches scattered amongst the hilly terrain. They considered the possibility that the suspect may know someone in the region. Agents and officers provided a description of the kidnapper and his victim and asked homeowners if they had seen anything unusual in the past hour. They found no one who had, and most were surprised to learn of the extensive manhunt.
With the assistance of deputies from the Calaveras County Sheriff's Department, we were able to assign them to do basically a property-to-property search to, first of all, search all the structures on that property. Second of all, account for all the vehicles, farm equipment, ATVs, that sort of thing. And also to inform the residents there of what was going on in the event that they would see the victim or suspect.
There were many outbuildings and barns located a short distance from the abandoned car. Landowners directed officers and agents to where they were located and allowed them to search every structure. Over the next 2 hours, dozens of teams found no trace of the tattooed man or the young girl. Because the area was vast, officers fastened yellow ribbons to structures at the front of the properties they had been to, so the next group would know that the location had been searched. But as thorough as the teams were, the uneven terrain favored the suspect.
As the teams would come back, would ask them, in the area that you searched, is it possible for someone to be hiding in there? And unfortunately, oftentimes they said it's possible. He would have to sit still, sit quiet, and sit hidden, but it's very possible.
By 11 p.m., over 4 hours since the girl had been taken from her home, searchers still had no way of knowing if the child was alive or dead. and no indication if she or her abductor were still in the area. Investigators hoped that alerting the public at large on the 11 o'clock news would prompt leads. Lodi Police Chief Larry Hansen held a press conference and faced questions from the community, including his own children.
I have 5 children. My youngest was 5 years old at the time, and she was aware that this kidnapping incident had occurred. And she saw me on television. She was talking to my wife, asking questions, you know, have they found the little girl? Have they found the little girl?
Unfortunately, the chief's wife had to tell their daughter that they had not. And as the hours increased from the time of her abduction, survival for the missing girl did not seem likely. By 5 a.m. on July 3rd, 1994, more than 10 hours had passed since a Lodi, California girl was abducted from her home. The FBI and a dozen local law enforcement agencies maintained a 2-square-mile perimeter in rural San Joaquin County, where they believed her kidnapper had fled with her the previous evening. Over 100 officials, including Lodi Police Lieutenant Gerald Murray, grappled with what to do next as they faced devastating uncertainty.
We were really concerned. I mean, do we even still have them in the area? Are we wasting our time here? Are they south of Highway 26 and we've missed them? You know, is he going to further victimize her? Is he going to commit a homicide? What's he going to do? Is he going to go to a house and abduct another victim or get another hostage? You have all these emotional things going on in your mind, and how can we best and humanly, prevent that?
As the search continued in the farming region, a team of Lodi police and FBI agents remained at the expanded command center in the Lodi library. They coordinated dozens of incoming officials and volunteers who wanted to assist. FBI Special Agent Charles Riley helped direct the search effort.
How old do you think she was?
Well, the search was organized, breaking everybody into small teams and then assigning the teams to sectors of the search. I think it was at least 4 or 5 persons per team, so they could spread out and cover an area. And we would assign areas, usually adjacent to each team, to only cover the area like patchwork. And then they would report back in the command post.
As soon as the sun came up, teams took advantage of the light. They began conducting linear grid searches of the vast farming region, hoping to find any sign that the girl or her unknown assailant were still in the area. FBI agent Charles Riley helped coordinate these meticulous searches.
We advised teams before they left that we could find things that would be evidence in the case. We could find clothing, we could find anything that might relate to it. One of the problems was we didn't know what things might and might not relate. So we didn't want to take a chance on bypassing anything that might be evidence, and told them anything they found that might be connected to the case, make sure they mark it, call it in.
By 11 that morning, searchers had covered all the territory down to the southwest perimeter established at Highway 26. They moved south of the highway to an area with even more places for someone to hide. There were fruit tree orchards, thick brush, and wide pastures. 8 dogs, horse patrols, and searchers on foot continued to scour the challenging terrain.
The area is becoming so expansive beyond the perimeter that the job of searching it would be much less thorough, and a chance of finding someone, particularly someone trying to hide from us, would be very difficult. And we weighed that against the fact that he may have escaped during the night, either through the large perimeter because it wasn't extremely tight, or was outside the perimeter before we even got it set up, and which would make the whole search for naught. Those 2 thoughts were pounding on us all day long.
Hoping for a lead, investigators canvassed the neighborhood in Lodi where the abduction had occurred 15 hours earlier.
Good afternoon. I'm Detective Reardon.
Since the suspect had approached the house on foot, perhaps he lived close by or had been hired by one of the neighbors to do yard work.
Okay. So a young fellow came around and...
They found no one who knew him.
Actually, come here a minute.
But several people did remember seeing the tattooed man. A young girl confirmed that she had spoken to the suspect about an hour before the abduction occurred. He had been walking through the neighborhood, targeting homes with for sale signs outside. Like he had at the victim's house, he said he was interested in buying and asked to come inside to take a look around. She refused and told him to call the realtor's number on the sign. But the scruffy man wasn't satisfied. As he continued to insist on coming in, the girl's father came in to see who his daughter was talking to. Startled, the would-be intruder quickly left the property. The daughter's description of the man exactly matched that of the other witnesses. It appeared that the drifter had been hunting for an opportunity to assault young girls, according to Lodi Police Chief Larry Hansen.
It's become a very difficult thing to realize that indeed there are people in our world who prey upon children, who abduct them, and who kill them, and that they're out there. They exist today as we are living our everyday lives. There are people who are plotting to steal someone's child. And it's a very frightening dose of reality to realize that that occurs.
In and around the community of Lodi, hundreds of volunteers posted flyers of the missing girl, which also included a sketch of her abductor. With the help of the Poly Class Foundation, they were able to saturate the area with over 20,000 flyers in a matter of hours. One of the leaflets finally hit home. A woman and her friend believed they recognized the sketch of the suspect. She immediately called police.
Is this the Lodi Police Department?
The woman told a detective that she thought the man in the composite may be her 25-year-old son, Stephen Reese Cochran.
About the little girl?
From the expanded command center in the Lodi Library, an officer dispatched investigators to her home to take a full statement.
Okay.
The woman's address was a short distance from the missing girl's neighborhood.
Yes.
He, in fact, told his mother prior to this kidnapping incident that he had a fantasy of kidnapping a young girl, of having his way with her, and then of killing her. And so I believe that that was a strong possibility.
She said her son Stephen usually stayed at a shelter in town, but would sometimes take a bus to visit her. At about 3 o'clock on the day of the abduction, he had left her house, walking towards the neighborhood where the crime had occurred. He was wearing cut-off shorts and no shirt. The photo of her son the woman provided officers matched the sketch of the suspect. Stephen Reese Cochran had been in and out of jail for much of his 25 years. Less than 2 months earlier, Cochran had been released from an Arizona prison after assaulting an underage girl.
The FBI assisted us in getting a copy of Stephen Reese Cochran's fingerprints faxed to us. We had some good crime lab work from the Department of Justice. They had lifted fingerprints from inside the house. They compared them to the fingerprints of Mr. Cochran, and it was a perfect match.
Police immediately released his photo to the media to alert the public. At about noon, 17 hours into the pursuit, a citizen called police to tell them that he had spotted the fugitive in a store parking lot 25 miles from Lodi. There was a young girl with him who he was screaming at to get into a vehicle. Police needed to act fast if there was any hope of rescuing the girl before she disappeared once more. More than 17 hours after a 12-year-old girl was kidnapped from her home in Lodi, California, police received a report that she and her suspected abductor, Stephen Reese Cochran, had been seen in a store parking lot in the town of Manteca.
Driver!
When children are abducted by a stranger, their chances for survival dramatically decrease if they're not found in the first 24 hours.
Exit the vehicle slowly. Face forward. Face forward.
Tell us all about?
Walk backwards until I tell you to stop.
The tattooed man resembled the suspect.
Get on your knees. Interlock your hands behind your head.
But his ID showed he was not Stephen Cochran. And the young girl was his daughter, not the child who had been kidnapped. The case of mistaken identity was one of many that added to the frustrations of Lodi Police Lieutenant Gerald Murray.
We had reports during the search of the suspect, which all turned out to be false sightings, but still they had to be investigated and looked into, which adds confusion to the whole process.
By now, over 400 officers and local volunteers had joined the search in San Joaquin County, where the kidnapper had abandoned the stolen vehicle 18 hours earlier. Still, they had found no signs, no clothing, not even a footprint from the suspect or the girl. It was clear that even if the fugitive had spared the girl's life, her condition was likely deteriorating in the heat of the Northern California summer, especially if she was tied up or injured.
You begin to, as time progresses, feel that obviously the worst is going to happen. Several conversations that I had with people that were there in the command post, we would sit down and discuss all these feelings and emotions and kind of bounce them off each other, I guess, for our own mental health. And always, when we concluded that, we came with like a second wind, we would call it, another rush of hope, another thing to do, another search to organize, another step to take to make it a good outcome.
At about 2 o'clock, a car approached officers stationed on a road within the 2-mile-wide perimeter. The local man had been so moved by TV news reports of the missing girl that he felt compelled to do what he could to help. He had taken it upon himself to drive up and down the area roads, scanning the fields for any sign of the suspect or the young girl. FBI Special Agent Charles Riley recalls that the residents' effort made a difference.
Searches were still ongoing, particularly in the area to the south, the area around the creek and the heavy foliage. Search was going on in that area when one of the cars going by on the road spotted a person out, and it was an area where we didn't have a team of searchers.
Just after the driver had left his residence, he spotted a filthy, shirtless man staggering through a distant pasture. The figure had blonde hair and was wearing cut-off jean shorts as described on the news. The witness was sure it was the suspect, but the young girl was nowhere in sight. Still, after 19 hours and hundreds of acres, it was the first hope searchers had that the fugitive was still in the area. One of the officers immediately radioed the command post to alert them to the suspect's location. A speedy response was essential to confine him before he got far. As agents and detectives called on all available personnel to converge, they received another call, this one from a fish and game officer.
A voice came over the radio and says, "Oh, we got a subject down here by the horse corrals, you know," and it's this fish and game guy who uses plain English instead of radio code. So we all just kind of froze, you know, kind of like deer in the headlights. Did I hear what I just heard? Did you say suspect or subject? I mean, subject could be anything. It could be somebody not even involved. Yeah, he sure looks like the guy, you know. So we're all, your little antennas go up, goosebumps and everything. So an FBI agent, my sheriff's counterpart, and we hopped in a car and we went down there.
Those who were closest responded to the remote area where a lone windmill stood next to a feeding pen for livestock. With guns drawn, 3 officers took positions just beyond the wide pasture. They watched silently as the tattooed man emerged from the wilderness without the child.
They were able to converge and hide before the suspect crested a hill. The suspect appeared to be heading towards that area, probably dehydrated and assuming he could probably get water from that area.
The fugitive appeared exhausted, but police could not tell if he was still armed with a knife.
Police, stop!
After almost 20 hours of pursuit, authorities finally had Stephen Reese Cochran in custody.
Behind your back.
The ex-convict claimed he didn't know why he was being arrested. He said he didn't remember anything about the past 24 hours, saying he was in a drug-induced haze. When investigators asked him where the girl was, he refused to answer. For Lodi Police Chief Larry Hansen, it was a moment filled with mixed emotions.
I was very relieved that we had our suspect into custody, but at the same time my heart dropped because our victim was not with him. And that just really concerned me that they weren't together. So I just didn't allow myself to get too caught up in the fact that we had him in custody. We still had a little girl to find.
Since Cochran refused to cooperate, the girl's location and her condition remained anyone's guess. But investigators would not rest until they recovered the young girl or her body. On July 3rd, 1994, 20 hours after the search for a kidnapped California girl had begun, the FBI and local authorities had arrested her suspected abductor, Stephen Reese Cochran. Cochran refused to say if the girl was dead or alive, or even if she was in the remote region where he had been captured. Though the child's odds of survival in the rugged terrain did not seem likely, Lodi Police Chief Larry Hansen tried to remain hopeful.
Most children that are abducted, we either never find them or we find them and they've been killed. And as this was unfolding, I was certainly aware of that. But again, we just tried to keep positive and focus all of our attention on the belief that we were going to be able to find her.
Authorities struggled with what to do next. 400 searchers, 10 dog teams, and 3 helicopters had been searching for her since daybreak, but failed to find even the smallest shred of evidence that the girl was close by. Lodi Police Lieutenant Gerald Murray weighed the possibilities.
At that particular time, we had basically 2 options. Attempt to follow the suspect's scent from where he was arrested back to the victim, or start a line search from the fenced area along Highway 26 and just walk north and hopefully run on to wherever the victim may have been.
A large group of volunteers had already assembled along the fence line near the pasture, waiting for the word to proceed. Agents and detectives were concerned that if they allowed such a large group to enter the field, the throng would likely trample evidence or might even walk past the small girl without seeing her. It was a critical moment, and like the eager searchers, FBI Special Agent Charles Riley felt the urgency.
You think about the families a lot, because everybody out there has a family, and you try to keep it professional, but it becomes part of you personally. And you relate, what if it's your sister, your daughter, and you always think those things.
Investigators decided that the best approach would be to use fresh dogs to trace Cochran's scent back from where he had approached the water trough. The problem was it would take the canine unit at least 30 minutes to get to the location. But the volunteers were not about to wait.
I noticed several civilians going over the fence into the crime scene area, and just as I began to send somebody down to have them ask them people to leave that area, I could hear sound and see the body language of people coming down the line from where these guys went over the fence, And there was obviously something happening, but at this particular point I couldn't distinguish what they were saying. And as the sound reached me, the crowd was saying, "There she is, there she is."
Like an apparition, a tiny figure appeared from behind the brush. Onlookers couldn't believe their eyes. The girl was alive, stumbling toward the sound of the jubilant searchers. The detective ordered officers out into the field to meet her.
When I first saw the victim coming over the hill, it was like an emotional dam had released. All the fears and worries and helplessness and hopelessness disappeared. And frankly, it took me about 10 minutes to get my composure and get back on track. People were high-fiving, hugging, shaking our hands, congratulating, crying. It's just amazing. This was really not just a law enforcement thing, but a community thing, and it really, really, really showed up at that moment, the emotion that was involved in it.
The girl was taken to the hospital where she was met by her distraught parents. On the following day, July 4th, despite her 22-hour ordeal, the girl felt strong enough to escort her father, a detective and the prosecutor, to the sites where Cochran had kept her hidden during the search. She explained that to avoid detection, Cochran had camouflaged her and himself with mud. He had also forced her to lie hidden, half submerged in the putrid water of a pond. It was too rank to drink, and she had nothing to eat for over 24 hours. Cochran kept moving, never staying in one place for very long.
Come on. Go.
The girl then showed the group another hiding place. At daybreak, she said they had hidden under some straw.
What happened?
During the time they were at that last hiding place, a sheriff's deputy who was on an ATV was going along a fence line no more than 30 feet from where they were located. The victim during that time, though, even under threat of bodily harm, attempted to stick her foot out of the grass area and get the attention of the deputy as he drove by, but she wasn't successful.
She said that at that location she fell asleep at some point. When she awoke, Cochran no longer had his knife.
Longer? Okay.
Several feet away, police located the weapon that he had repeatedly held to her throat. Cochran's thumbprint was later recovered from it.
We've got the weapon. Definitely.
After being found mentally competent to stand trial, Stephen Reese Cochran pled guilty to 23 counts, including kidnapping, assault, burglary, and car theft. In San Joaquin County Superior Court, he was sentenced to 106 years in prison for his crimes. Even Lodi Police Chief Larry Hanson's 5-year-old daughter understood the importance of this case.
When it was over and I was able to go home and then finally able to fall asleep, she came home later and was told that the little girl had been found. And she walks down the hallway, goes to my bedroom door, kisses the door and says, "Thank you, Daddy." And when I talk to officers at conferences, I make the point that if a 5-year-old girl can understand the impact of that type of a case, imagine the impact that it's going to have on your community.
The successful conclusion of the case in Lodi, California, together with the legacy of Polly Klaas and the Foundation for Missing Children, became the models by which child abduction cases across the country are now handled. With a quick response from citizens and officials alike, communities are learning how to increase the percentages for survival when one of their own goes missing. In 1982, a California Highway Patrol officer pulled a young woman over for speeding. He bullied her into sex and then killed her. He then used a decade of police experience to try to cover up his crime and convince local investigators of his innocence. But would he get away with it?
Society depends on trust and authority. It's a system that works, and because it works, we hardly think about it. A uniformed officer demands respect, and we willingly comply. But what if that trust were betrayed? What if a police officer abuses his authority? George Gwaltney was one such cop. The popular and decorated California Highway Patrol officer committed the ultimate violation. He murdered. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. When good cops go bad, the full power of law enforcement rallies to repair the damage, rebuild the trust, and deliver justice. The Gwaltney case taxed the resources of both state police and the FBI. He was a cunning adversary, trained in crime solving, and he knew how to cover his tracks.
23-year-old Robin Bishop had left her home in Las Vegas to visit a friend in Los Angeles.
But then you gotta carry trays, so you gotta work on yours.
Robin had hopes of becoming an actress. Her friend convinced her that if she was serious about acting, she had to move to LA.
Okay, let's see.
Robin headed back to Vegas to pack up and make the move. She was excited about her future. In Barstow, California, she stopped to call her mother and get a sandwich. Returning to her car, she fell under the gaze of a predator, California Highway Patrolman George Gwaltney. Though he was a highly respected officer and member of the community, Gwaltney had a secret history of stopping women for speeding and then soliciting them for sex in exchange for getting out of a ticket. The night of January 11th, 1982 was no different. He quickly memorized the make and model of her car. He also noticed the Nevada license plate. Next, Gwaltney saw a neighborhood boy he knew, a boy who, if necessary, could be used as a convenient alibi.
Hey, Preston, you want to ride?
He picked up Preston Olson and gave him a ride home. A former winner of the Officer of the Year award, Gwaltney was well known for such kind actions. Barstow parents trusted Gwaltney to keep a protective eye on their children. He dropped Preston off at his house and said hello to his parents. By now, the young woman whom Gwaltney had targeted would be well out of town, headed toward Nevada on Interstate 15. The ordinarily well-traveled highway was unusually quiet. He caught up with her on the empty highway east of Barstow. He turned on his light and siren and pulled her over. Robin Bishop had a string of tickets for speeding. She had in fact just finished a year of probation and had been given a warning that another ticket would cost her her license. Robin knew that a car and a driver's license would be essential for an aspiring actress in Los Angeles.
Okay, man. Do you have any idea how fast you were going?
Pretty bad.
Just a little bit too fast. I'm gonna have to ask for your license, man. Okay, Robin, I'm going to have to ask you to get out of the vehicle and follow me back to my squad.
She left the keys in the ignition and her purse in the car.
Let's take a little walk back to the squad car.
Robin was probably surprised to be taken back to the patrol car, but she obeyed. Unfortunately, Gwaltney had more than a speeding ticket in mind.
Go ahead and turn around for chance on your head. I'm going to have to cuff you and kick you in.
For speeding?
Yep, that's the law.
I was just speeding.
Gwaltney stood her up against the patrol car and handcuffed her. As he put her into his back seat, she must have been scared and confused. Why the handcuffs? Where was he taking her? Gwaltney returned to her car to get her purse. At that moment, a car with a lone driver passed by. Gwaltney retrieved the purse, returned to his car, and pulled away, leaving her car abandoned on the interstate shoulder. He drove Robin to an exit that led to a seldom-used access road running parallel to the highway. It was a place he often went to take a break during his patrol shift. A secluded lookout point where he could observe the highway some 400 feet away, clearly from all directions. There, holding the threat of jail or loss of license over her, Gwaltney raped Robin Bishop. When he was done with her, he radioed in a wants and warrants check on Robin's car as if it were abandoned. He knew he'd been spotted walking towards Robin's empty car.
Yeah, I'd like to report a 2829. Yeah, license number 561 FBD.
It was the first in a long line of lies covering his actions for the official record.
Copy that. 2-4.
Drove her down the parallel access road to a point where Robin could walk back to her car. He removed the cuffs and let her out of the car. Things were working out for Gwaltney. He'd gotten what he was after and was simply going to let her go. But as she sat on the ground to put on her boots, something happened. Perhaps anger replaced fear now that she was released. Perhaps she threatened him with exposure. Her brother was a prosecutor in Nevada. Regardless, it would be her word against his. But then, as he stood next to his vehicle, he was suddenly caught in the spotlight of a passing deputy sheriff's car. The deputy may well have noticed Gwaltney's patrol car from the highway nearby. Gwaltney could not know whether he had been recognized. Suddenly, Robin's threats became more real. How could he explain being out there on the access road? In a moment of panic, Officer George Gwaltney decided Robin had to be silenced. Gwaltney took a final and irrevocable step. Now, there was no way to distance himself from the dead girl. Frantic, he devised a way out. He called the dispatcher and reported finding a dead body, a possible suicide. Knowing he had only moments before other officers would arrive at the scene, he searched under her head for the bullet that had killed her. As evidence, the bullet had the power to destroy him, but there was no exit wound. Homicide Detective Milt Rose of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department was sent to investigate the dead body found by Gwaltney. On his way to the crime scene, the dispatcher asked that he examine the abandoned car. As the body had been found a short distance away on the access road and was visible to investigators already at the crime scene, the police suspected there was a connection between the car and the body.
I did not see any obvious signs of any malfunctions. No mechanical breakdowns. The tires were all in good condition. The vehicle was in gear. The keys were inside the vehicle. Why did the vehicle stop at the location it was at?
At the crime scene, Officer Gwaltney was now composed and professional. He described how he found the victim, checked for a pulse, and looked in her purse for identification. The Nevada vehicle registration and driver's license identified her as Robin Bishop, owner of the abandoned car he had called in earlier. Although Officer Gwaltney had reported an apparent suicide, Detective Rose quickly ruled out that possibility. The victim had been shot in the back of the head at close range, then moved slightly. 4 inches from her head was a stream of blood on the ground. Clearly, this was a homicide. Recent rainfall made tracks and footprints from Gwaltney and his cruiser clearly visible in the damp sand.
In this general area, we found a couple of footprints that appeared to come around the front of the vehicle. They travel around in the front of the vehicle and off in a direction sorted towards the middle area of the vehicle. We travel over here into an area about where this bush is located, or right in this general area, and that's where Robin Bishop's body was found. The other footprints that we found were leading from the driver's door on the Highway Patrol unit to an area towards the front of the vehicle and then over towards Robin's body, kind of facing off in the easterly direction.
The first officer arriving on the scene criticized Gwaltney for the profusion of his footprints, a clear contamination of the crime scene and uncharacteristically sloppy work.
Why are you going to do this? You need to come to the crime scene out here.
Further examination, I noticed what appeared to be marks on her wrist.
The marks were familiar to any police officer. 2 thin marks across the top of her wrist and 1 across the bottom, typical of those made by handcuffs. Then, when Detective Rose examined the contents of the victim's purse, he could find no signs of robbery, but the vehicle registration and driver's license were lying on top of the purse's contents, as if they'd been shown to someone and quickly thrown back into the purse.
It indicated to me that we needed to take a look at some type of vehicle stop or somebody in some type of position of authority possibly stop this car.
To Rose, the evidence pointed to the involvement of a police officer or someone posing as one. Every investigator at the crime scene was either a friend or a colleague of Officer Gwaltney. That he might be connected with the crime was not even considered at this point. An autopsy was performed. The results confirmed that the body had been moved slightly after being shot, and that the bruises were in fact made by handcuffs. The fatal bullet was found lodged in Robin's jaw. Though it was the caliber of a standard police service revolver, the brand was not the standard ammunition. The autopsy also showed that she had had sex within 24 hours of her death, but there were none of the normal physical signs of a forcible rape.
The first thing we needed to do was to eliminate people that had been to the scene or could have been in the area. Other highway patrol officers, other deputies, whoever was in that particular area around that time frame. We needed to start with Officer Gwaltney to begin with, because Officer Gwaltney was a person who found the body.
Gwaltney's survival depended on staying one step ahead of the investigation. When he finished his shift that night, he struggled to remove the gun barrel from the murder weapon. It was the one piece of hard evidence that could conclusively implicate him in the crime. Gwaltney knew his gun barrel left identifiable markings on the bullet that killed Robin Bishop. The next morning, he went to a local gun shop to order a new barrel, which would confuse a ballistics test. But the barrel was not in stock and had to be ordered. Then he took his uniform to the dry cleaner and his holster to the repair shop for re-dyeing and restitching. All that remained was to stall for time until the gun barrel arrived. In Barstow, Rose held a briefing that morning with the police and sheriff departments to discuss the case. He asked all officers on duty the night before to turn in their weapons so that ballistics tests could eliminate them as possible suspects in the crime. Gwaltney made sure to attend. During the briefing, he learned that the fatal bullet had been recovered. By early evening, Gwaltney was the only officer who had not turned in his weapon for testing. The detectives went to his home and asked for his service revolver. He returned moments later with the wrong gun, his off-duty weapon.
George, this isn't your service revolver, and that's what we need. Your service revolver. Service.
The captain sent him back for his service revolver, but he returned empty-handed.
You aren't going to believe this, but it's been stolen.
What do you mean stolen?
Stolen? Well,
George,
there's been some burglaries in the
He claimed
neighborhood.
that his house must have been burglarized. The gun was missing.
have to ask for your...
The story sounded doubtful,
Just a formality.
but because Gwaltney was a highway patrol officer, Detective Brian English with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department was inclined to believe him.
I kind of empathized with him because we were, in my opinion, we were looking for evidence to show that he didn't do it. It was some criminal that did it. You know.
Gwaltney agreed to come to headquarters for questioning. But first, the detectives searched his locker for the missing weapon. They found nothing.
Then we sat down and we started talking with Officer Gwaltney. And to him, it didn't appear important that his gun was gone, which was very significant. And if I was in his position, I'd been extremely worried, and it didn't seem to bother him.
By now, it was almost 2 days after the crime. The missing weapon and Gwaltney's odd behavior made it impossible to deny the obvious. Gwaltney was advised of his constitutional rights. Although this made him the primary suspect in the case, there was insufficient evidence to actually arrest him. Insisting he was innocent, Gwaltney agreed to give a tape-recorded interview.
That we can record on tape about the night that Robin was shot. Yeah, I have no problem with that.
He said he'd worked his regular beat patrolling the interstate on January 11th. After his dinner break, he had picked up a young boy he knew, Preston Olson, whom he had seen walking home alone. After dropping Preston off at his house, he was by 8:50 p.m. back on the interstate. About 9:15, he found the abandoned car, ran a stolen vehicle check, then turned onto the access road. Seeing a pale shape, he had pulled over. It was the body of the victim, Robin Bishop.
He was not reacting normally for a person who had been accused of committing this kind of a crime. Had it been me, I would not be talking to them. I'd tell them to prove it. I'd be very irate. I'd be very upset.
Officer Gwaltney had repeatedly insisted on taking a lie detector test. He reiterated his statement and then answered a series of critical questions, including the direct question, had he killed Robin Bishop?
No.
The examiner could find no sign of deception in the polygraph exam. Gwaltney had just crossed another hurdle in his cover-up.
We transported George from the Barstow station back down to San Bernardino for the questioning. At that time, George gave his consent to go ahead and search his house.
Sheriff's deputies investigated Gwaltney's claim that his house must have been burglarized, but they could find no sign of forced entry. The homicide detectives then began their work. At dawn, they found the frame of a Smith & Wesson Model 19 .357 Magnum revolver inside Gwaltney's truck. The frame was badly damaged with tool marks. It appeared to have been dismantled by someone who had no knowledge of how to take it apart.
The barrel, which would have been used for a ballistics comparison, was gone. Therefore, there's no ballistics match could be done.
The gun frame was registered to George Michael Gwaltney. To the detectives, it had been dismantled for only one purpose. Gwaltney was placed under arrest. But the evidence was still only circumstantial. A link between the revolver and the tools used to dismantle it had to be found. The detectives returned to Gwaltney's home for another search. Evidence was collected. Gripping-type tools and a pipe vise found behind the garage that showed fresh signs of metal transfer. In the bedroom closet, detectives found 5 boxes of bullets bearing the CHP insignia. In the boxes among the standard police rounds, they found 27 bullets of another brand. 357 caliber 158 grain soft points made by Remington Arms, the same kind of bullet that killed Robin Bishop. Gwaltney's wife was in a state of shock and disbelief. When questioned, she assured the detectives again and again that George had not been acting strangely or in any way different lately. He was a good husband and a good father to their children.
He's a wonderful husband, a very caring father.
News of Gwaltney's arrest stunned the small community of Barstow. His fellow officers had known and respected him for decades. Despite the considerable evidence against Gwaltney, they were unable to accept his possible guilt.
Pretty dramatic and emotional thing when another law enforcement officer is accused of committing a murder.
Most of the people knew George, and they could not believe that George Gwaltney could have done something so bad.
I recall a couple of the officers that were close friends of his were in tears when I was interviewing them because they didn't want to believe that George could do this.
Even the investigators struggled to come to grips with the conclusion they had been forced to draw.
My feeling was, he didn't do it. He couldn't do it. He's a highway patrolman.
But the evidence continued to mount. Semen was found in the backseat of Gwaltney's cruiser and in Robin's jeans. A critical report was filed by Sheriff's Deputy Roger Kaufman, who had been out of town the days following the crime and had only just learned of Gwaltney's arrest. He described driving by the exact crime scene area about the time of the murder. From the interstate, he spotted a car's parking lights on the little-used access road. Shining his spotlight on the car, he saw an officer standing by it, but was driving too fast to identify him. Barely minutes later, he heard a very upset Gwaltney calling in a possible suicide on the radio. He'd been surprised to hear Gwaltney, a man known for his unshakable presence, sounding so agitated, but had not given the incident any thought until he learned of the arrest. As the investigation progressed, it became apparent that Gwaltney had used his knowledge of investigative procedure to thwart detectives' efforts to collect evidence against him. His uniform had been dry cleaned, his holster re-dyed and re-stitched, allegedly for an upcoming inspection. Any evidence of blood or tissue transferred from the gun had been destroyed. His footprints had altered the crime scene. When detectives questioned the owners of gun stores in the area, on the theory Gwaltney would have tried to buy a replacement barrel for his service revolver, none could recall him being in their stores. After several months of an internal investigation, Gwaltney was fired from the California Highway Patrol.
Okay, bye.
Now convinced that he had committed the worst imaginable crime, detectives were still unable to prove Gwaltney was lying. His wife and friends still solidly supported him. 9 months later, the trial began, with prosecutor Betty Kennedy confident that the considerable evidence, though mostly circumstantial, was strong enough to result in a quick conviction. In his opening statement, defense attorney George Porter told the jury that George Michael Gwaltney was the victim of a frame-up, possibly by someone in his own department. Someone stopped Miss Bishop, as he would show, but it was not George Gwaltney. The defense produced a key witness, railroad worker Dennis Gubler, who testified that he had passed Robin Bishop's empty car on the highway shoulder that night. A light-colored car was parked 50 feet behind it. Gubler described to the jury a man carrying a flashlight who was approaching Bishop's car. His description, however, seemed to eliminate Gwaltney as the man he saw. other suspects, Porter contended, must be considered. The prosecution constructed a precise and elaborate timeline for the jury, from Robin's final phone call to her mother in Barstow to Gwaltney's radio call reporting the discovery of her body. The timeline included all of Gwaltney's known actions and time for the murder as well. The prosecution believed its case was bulletproof. Travel times, the pickup of the Olsen boy, the deputy's sighting, the radio calls, everything. But Gwaltney's attorney countered by producing dozens of witnesses, CHP colleagues and personal friends who testified to his impeccable character and record. He used the timeline itself to cast doubt on the series of events. Could Gwaltney possibly have had enough time, barely 20 minutes, to do all he was accused of? The defense easily challenged the scientific analysis of the semen samples from the car and the victim. The technology for using DNA in the courtroom was still 6 years in the future. In addition, Porter was able to cast doubt on the prosecution's inconclusive tool mark analysis of the gun frame and tools taken from Gwaltney's vehicle and residence. Nevertheless, the prosecution believed the bullet evidence and the dismantled gun frame would be enough to convince the jury.
The strongest evidence that we had in the particular case was the frame of the gun. How can you explain the frame? How can you explain why it was in the vehicle? Why was it taken apart? Why was the barrel missing? Why was the cylinder missing? The grips, the hammer, the trigger? Why?
Gwaltney was prepared and polished, providing the defense with its best witness, himself.
He had an answer for everything that was questioned to him. And every answer he had was feasible. And what their defense tactic was to put a small amount of doubt into each one of the items of evidence that we presented. And that's what they did. And George did an excellent job of tying up all the loose ends when he testified.
In the end, the testimony of 50 witnesses in 30 areas of expertise and all the accumulated evidence failed to convince the local jury. After 4 days, a deadlock was declared, 8-4 in favor of acquittal. George Gwaltney was a free man.
Nothing is, as some people say, a slam dunk. And you never know which way the jury's going to go. You never know which evidence the judge is going to let in and which evidence the judge won't let in. So, because I wasn't involved in the daily routine, I was very much surprised that George was not found guilty.
We spoke to a number of the jurors, and a few of the jurors thought there was a good possibility George was the one responsible, but they couldn't believe he actually did it. And if he did do it, he was a highway patrolman. He worked hard. He worked for the community. He was respected. We just couldn't find him guilty.
Still believing George Gwaltney was guilty, prosecutors were determined to get a conviction. Less than 1 year after the mistrial, Gwaltney was tried again in Superior Court. But with little new evidence presented, the trial ended in another deadlocked jury, 7-5 in favor of acquittal. George Gwaltney walked away, seemingly out of reach of the law.
I was stunned. I sat around for several hours just thinking about rehashing what could have we done to change the outcome. What could we do if and when there's another trial?
Arguing the appearance of harassment, the judge denied prosecutors a third trial. It appeared that George Gwaltney could not be brought to justice in the town of Barstow.
We felt, and I was convinced, that George killed this lady and that we needed someone to come in and prosecute George. George needed to pay for what happened.
From the moment of Gwaltney's arrest, the FBI had been watching this case with great interest. Anytime a homicide involving a police officer takes place, the FBI monitors the investigation. After Gwaltney was acquitted a second time, there was enormous public pressure to find the truth surrounding Robin Bishop's murder. The FBI's Los Angeles field office decided it was time to intervene. The FBI knew that George Gwaltney could never be tried again for Robin Bishop's murder in the state of California. But in a federal court, he could be charged with violating her civil rights. By killing Robin Bishop while he was on duty, George Gwaltney had committed a federal crime. By taking her life, he had violated her civil rights. This had never been argued in a criminal trial before. But the FBI and federal prosecutors believed the Bishop murder was a perfect test case. The case was assigned to Special Agent Michael Randolph.
Gwaltney was like a wolf in the sheep pen. The local law enforcement didn't know that he was the perpetrator. He was the person that had committed the murder, so he would stay one step ahead of them, destroying evidence. And this is a significant reason that the locals were unsuccessful in their prosecution. They didn't realize what they were dealing with.
Exhaustively reviewing the crime scene photographs, Agent Randolph's attention was caught by a photo. It revealed the contents of the trunk of Gwaltney's patrol car the night of the murder. In it, he spotted a small box of ammunition. He sent the photos off for enlargement and analysis.
We were notified by the FBI laboratory that photographic analysis revealed that that was a box of .357 Magnum ammunition and was in fact illegal ammo of the type that Gwaltney had testified he did not carry and was not carrying the night of the murder. It was also, we believe, the same box of ammo that was collected from his house.
Agent Randolph had just caught George Gwaltney in his first lie.
We knew that he had lied about one thing at the two local trials. There had to be other things that he had lied about.
Working closely with the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department and the California Highway Patrol, Agent Randolph began re-examining virtually all of the evidence from the first two state trials.
Instead of handling it as a usual criminal investigation, we took an exhaustive approach, sort of like a TWA Flight 800 approach. Every rivet had to be looked at, every rock had to be looked at.
The mountain of reports, transcripts, photos, and physical evidence would be painstakingly re-examined by the FBI labs and Bureau field agents.
Key things that were used that we sent back to the lab would include such things as, obviously, the frame of the gun. The frame of the gun had been recovered by the local police, and they had done tool mark analysis but had been unable to show who took the gun apart.
The gun frame was sent back to the Firearms Tool Mark Unit of the FBI labs in Washington. Unique in the world, the lab has a collection of over 2,000 guns, from John Dillinger's pistol to the newest military assault rifle. Every bullet manufactured for the last 50 years is here too. Hollow point and steel jacket, 22 to 50 caliber. Like the guns, they're all here for testing and comparison. The soundproof ballistic room allows for comparison firing and bullet retrieval. Comparative microscopes allow for precise analysis of the gun barrels. But the most valuable asset in the lab are the agents, whose long experience in these specialized tests make them invaluable in difficult cases such as the Bishop murder. Jim Cadigan of the FBI Firearms and Tool Mark Unit was brought into the case to conduct a tool mark analysis of the gun frame and the 15 different wrenches and tools, including the pipe vise, taken from Gwaltney's home. Steel tools almost always leave behind some distinctive and often microscopic mark after their use, a signature as unique as a fingerprint. The FBI Tool Mark Lab is one of the largest, most specialized, and most technologically sophisticated in the country.
It was obvious from the beginning that the individual that had worked on this particular firearm knew something about forensics because he had removed several pieces of the firearm that could be of some use later on to a forensic examiner.
Agent Cadigan approached the very specific task of associating the tool marks on the gun frame with the tool marks made by the 15 gripping tools taken from the Gwaltney home.
The question was, could one of these tools have been used to hold the frame while the barrel of the firearm was being removed? In looking at the frame, I noticed near where the hole was for the pin that locks the barrel down, very near the hole for that, there was a small 1/16 of an inch impression, almost as if it was made by a small screwdriver tip, right below that hole.
This tiny mark matched a small imperfection in one of Gwaltney's tools.
In looking at the tools that were submitted from Gwaltney, I noticed that one of those tools, a pipe wrench, had a broken tooth, and the tooth was broken off in the middle, and then there was a small island of metal left on the tooth, and that looked very similar to the mark that was on the frame. So using that as a pivot point, I started making impressions with that tool and comparing those impressions under a microscope, the tool marks, with the impressions that were on the frame, and was able to come to a conclusion that that particular tool was used to the exclusion of any other tool to make the marks that were found on the frame.
In addition to the tool marks testing, the FBI lab conducted extensive testing on the particular bullets found in the Gwaltney home. The lack of a barrel on Gwaltney's gun made a ballistics test impossible, a problem that had hurt the prosecution in the state trials. So the FBI lab devised a test that had never before been used forensically, a radical new use of nuclear technology in forensic science.
When a manufacturer of lead like Remington Arms makes a batch of lead, they throw things in much as you would when you're making meatloaf. That makes each batch of lead unique. We then took over 200 rounds that the locals had collected when they did their investigation of George Michael Gwaltney. We submitted those to the lab. The lab made those radioactive and got their molecular weight, their chemical fingerprint, and lo and behold, we find approximately 27 rounds that are the exact match as the lead taken from the head of our victim.
The samples in the reactor absorb neutrons and become radioactive. This radioactivity is measured and gives a precise reading of the chemical elements in the lead from the bullet, an atomic fingerprint. The radioactive tests were indisputable. Each of the 27 bullets found in Gwaltney's closet, bullets he had sworn under oath he did not own, had come from the same batch of lead as the bullet that killed Robin Bishop. The FBI lab worked to establish a definite match between Gwaltney's gun frame and his pipe wrench, and between the fatal bullet and the bullets found in his home. Additionally, Agent Randolph constructed psychological portraits of not only George Gwaltney, but Robin Bishop. It was important that the federal jury perceive her as a genuine victim. Robin Bishop was raped by someone she was taught to respect and trust, an officer of the law.
This made it very easy to understand the lack of force of violence that was evident in the crime scene other than the trauma. And she was compliant. She respected law enforcement authority. She's the type of person that pulled over and opened her wallet and handed her and stood out and was handcuffed even though she knew all she had done was a speeding ticket. It made her an easy victim.
In the same way, the FBI examined every aspect of Gwaltney's background to gain an understanding of his behavior around women. By questioning a woman who admitted to having an affair with Gwaltney, it was learned that she would meet him at his regular spot along the isolated highway for sex. The same exit to the access road where he had taken Robin Bishop. Every woman who received a summons from Gwaltney in the last 2 years was contacted, and a pattern emerged. Nearly a dozen women claimed that Gwaltney had solicited them for sex or touched them suggestively.
This indicated to us that this was not an isolated sexual assault with Mr. Gwaltney. This is a type of pattern of behavior. When he put his uniform on, he became predatory towards females, was our conclusion.
Witness testimony from the state trials was also carefully re-examined for discrepancies that could lead to breaks in the case. In some instances, the FBI leaned hard with the weight of federal authority.
Many witnesses were reluctant to testify, fearful. It's a small community, everybody knows everybody. We had to let them know that a federal investigation is just not a local matter that's going to blow away with the wind out in the desert. We're going to be here until this is resolved.
This persistence led to one of the most crucial breakthroughs in the case. San Bernardino Sheriff's detectives had originally interviewed the owners of Barstow gun shops for signs that Gwaltney might have tried to buy a replacement barrel for his service revolver the day after the crime. None claimed to have seen him. One of those interviewed was a Mr. William Addington, owner of the Powderhorn Gun Shop. He had denied during both state trial investigations that George Gwaltney had been in his shop the day after the murder. But printouts from the shop's phone bills caught Addington in a lie.
And we found toll records that show the day after the homicide, late in the afternoon, after the briefing that Gwaltney had attended, Mr. Addington had made a phone call up to this gun shop in Sacramento attempting to order a barrel for the type of weapon that Mr. Gwaltney carried that was now missing the barrel.
Now confronted by the FBI with this evidence, Addington admitted that Gwaltney had been in his store trying to buy a barrel for his revolver the day after Robin Bishop's murder. Addington had previously lied to state investigators in an effort to avoid getting involved. Fearing that lying to the FBI was a felony, Addington broke down. Reviewing the timeline of events, the FBI found that Gwaltney had created a false alibi to cover his visit to the gun shop and shoe repair shop where he'd had his holster cleaned and dyed, claiming to be on duty at the time. Gwaltney's story was falling apart. But the most important part of the timeline that the FBI reviewed was the pickup and delivery of the neighborhood boy Preston Olson.
The problem with that story was nobody had ever sat down with Preston Olson. He testified at 2 trials, and he verified what Gwaltney said.
But as the FBI went over the events with Preston and his mother, minute by minute, they realized that Officer Gwaltney had actually left the boy's house a half hour earlier than his original testimony.
Preston never owned a watch and had never timed it, and nobody had ever done a timeline analysis with him.
This new information and the resulting revision of the timeline was one of the most important developments in the FBI's case.
We didn't stop for anything. There was no traffic whatsoever.
He can't change his story. He's locked himself in on 2 local trials to the local timeline. So the timeline was very significant. It gives him a half hour he has no explanation for.
With the revised timeline, Officer Gwaltney now had ample time, 20 to 40 minutes, to stop Bishop, handcuff her, force her to have sex with him, then shoot her.
Gwaltney knows she's got out-of-state plates. She's an attractive young blonde woman. He zips up the road, takes him a couple minutes, and then gives chase.
Finally, Dr. Edward Blake of Forensic Science Associates was contacted to re-examine the semen evidence from the first 2 trials. Prior to the use of DNA in criminal trials, the use of semen as evidence was problematic. But the FBI felt there might still be a way to use what they had. Gwaltney had had a vasectomy and had it reversed. Was there any way this information could be used in the identification and matching of his semen with the crime scene specimens? Federal prosecutors asked Dr. Blake, a forensic serologist, if there were any new scientific developments that might help the investigation.
He said, well, I mean, science does progress over time, does it not, Dr. Blake? I mean, maybe there's something, and would you be willing to just look into the matter? And I said, well, I happen to know some people that are involved in fertility work And one of the elements that's involved in this case is the idea that Mr. Gwaltney had had a vasectomy and had it reversed.
Dr. Blake learned from colleagues at the University of California that a vasectomy reversal can sometimes cause the production of anti-sperm antibodies. The body reacts to sperm seeping into the bloodstream as if it were invading germs. The phenomenon is highly unusual and could conceivably be used as a marker in seminal fluid. He sent samples from Gwaltney to the University of California lab.
We found that not only do those fluids contain the anti-sperm antibodies, the antibodies were there at very, very high levels. And that provided the incentive to then explore the evidence itself.
Dr. Blake learned of a new test used in fertility studies. It was called the immunobead assay test and could determine the presence of anti-sperm antibodies in the crime scene samples. Because this kind of evidence had never been used in court before, Dr. Blake videotaped the test to show the jury in the federal trial.
Ultimately, extracts that were prepared from a pair of genes that were on Robin Bishop's body, samples that were taken from the Highway Patrol car seat were prepared, and these samples were tested for the presence of these anti-sperm antibodies. And in both of those samples, the anti-sperm antibodies were found.
During the 6-month FBI investigation, all of the re-examined evidence and all of the new witness testimony led to one bedrock certainty for the special agents working on the case.
We know we've got the right guy, and we're going to get him.
George Gwaltney was going back to court. George Michael Gwaltney was indicted by a federal grand jury for violating the civil rights of Robin Bishop and arrested. He was the first California law officer to be charged under the federal civil rights statute. Once again, he pleaded not guilty. But for the first time since the ordeal began, Robin Bishop's parents had hopes for a different outcome. This time, George Gwaltney faced a federal court and the FBI. It was clear from the beginning that the federal trial would not be a repeat of the first two trials. The federal trial began on January 17, 1984, in the U.S. District Court in Los Angeles. George Gwaltney was represented by public defender Carol Douglas, who chose not to have his client testify. He knew George Gwaltney was in serious trouble.
And then he subsequently murdered her.
Gwaltney knew that we were breaking his alibis, breaking his stories, and that he was going to have to concoct a new story. He had painted himself into a corner, and we were going to use his brush to paint him into a jail cell.
This is a frame-up.
As the trial progressed, the FBI punched a hole in every strong point of Gwaltney's earlier defense. The prosecution told the jury that Gwaltney had marked Robin Bishop as prey the first time he saw her in the fast food restaurant. With the testimony of the other women he had abused, Gwaltney's Officer of the Year image crumbled. After dropping Preston Olson at home, he pulled Bishop over and ordered her into his patrol car. The new testimony now gave him plenty of time. Following an established pattern, he drove to a familiar secluded spot and forced her into a sexual bargain, corroborated by the semen stain on the back seat of his new patrol car. As she sat struggling to put her boots back on, the blinding spotlight of Deputy Kaufman's patrol car hit Gwaltney, placing Gwaltney on the access road with Robin Bishop away from her car. Having no idea of who had seen him or what they had seen, he panicked and killed Robin Bishop. Then he breathlessly called the dispatcher with a possible suicide. The autopsy and the crime scene photos showed that he had not moved her head to check for a pulse. The movement was too great. He was desperately searching for the bullet that killed her, one in a series of actions in which he tried to cover up his crime. That night, Gwaltney roughly removed the barrel from the murder weapon, which left the microscopic tool-marked fingerprints that matched the gun frame with Gwaltney's tools. But perhaps most damning in the courtroom was the controversial immunobead assay test. Videotape of tested samples from Robin's jeans and the car seat show the tiny beads attaching themselves to the sperm.
What you can see in these videotapes for the appropriate specimens, that is, specimens that contain the anti-sperm antibody, is the final stage of the analysis.
Live sperm were shown swimming through the medium with the beads attached, indicating that the antibodies were present in both specimens. Dr. Blake was allowed by the judge only to indicate percentage results of his testing. He testified that Gwaltney's blood type put him in 12% of the population. Of that 12%, only 5% of those would test positive for the presence of anti-sperm antibodies. Less than 1% of the population could possibly have had sexual intercourse with Robin Bishop that night. As much as the defense might argue that the rest of the evidence was circumstantial, the scientific evidence was overpowering. The verdict was returned swiftly.
When the jury walked in, they would not look at Gwaltney, and it was very clear that they had a guilty verdict.
As far as I was concerned, I was pleased and that George had to suffer the consequences of his action, and that Robin Bishop's death didn't go uninvestigated.
It was, it's a case you'll never forget.
You took advantage of a vulnerable person.
The judge gave George Gwaltney the stiffest possible sentence, a maximum federal prison term of 90 years and a minimum term of 30 years before becoming eligible for parole.
Mr. Gwaltney, you have
12 years
betrayed your
later,
badge.
George Gwaltney died in prison of a heart attack. To the end, he claimed he was innocent and had been the victim of a frame-up. A Labor Day weekend turned into a nightmare of murder as a cross-country crime spree terrorized the nation. A pair of suspected spree killers traveled through state after state, leaving murder victims in their wake. Working against time, the FBI and local authorities marshaled their resources to stop the killings.
In a small Ohio community, an elderly woman and a teenage boy disappeared. Because they vanished within hours of each other, police believe the cases were linked, but they didn't know how. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. A trail of stolen vehicles and murder victims across 7 states led the FBI on a hunt for 2 serial killers. Their only hope of stopping them was to anticipate the killer's next move.
August 29th, 1994. Summer was drawing to a close in the small town of Port Washington, Ohio. The peaceful farming community was dotted with isolated rural homes. A 79-year-old widow, Ruth Loader, lived alone. Those of her family that lived nearby kept a close eye on Mrs. Loader since she was battling with cancer. When she heard footsteps in the kitchen, she thought it might be her granddaughter returning to see her before she went to sleep. She discovered strangers instead. The following morning, the Tuscarawas County Sheriff's Office received an urgent call from Mrs. Loader's sister. As was their routine, Mrs. Loader's sister and son-in-law came to check on the sick woman, but found Mrs. Loader and her car missing. Sheriff Walter Wilson, a detective lieutenant at the time, was the lead investigator.
Family members had seen Mrs. Loader the evening prior to the morning of her disappearance. She was fine at that time. They had indicated to us that Mrs. Loader was recovering from cancer surgery, that she definitely needed medication, which was left behind.
The family was worried since Mrs. Loader was so weak. She would become very ill if she was without her medication for long.
Go ahead and go with him.
Marks on the back door and damage to the door frame indicated it had been kicked in.
You hear it?
The forced entry told the sheriff that the frail woman had not left of her own free will. Mrs. Loader's purse was left behind, but her cash was missing, along with the keys to her red Buick. Sheriff Wilson immediately issued an all-points bulletin for the widow and her car.
Sheriff's Department.
He knew that they'd have the best chance of finding her alive if they acted quickly.
We felt very early on that Mrs. Loader obviously had been kidnapped. We immediately began a massive search for Mrs. Loader and her car. Then that involved all of the area law enforcement agencies. It involved numerous fire department personnel. Citizens from the area came out in droves and helped with the search for Mrs. Loader.
And I need you two to work rush. We're going to try to stay in this general area.
Concerned over her fate, the community was united in its pursuit.
We have to finish what they did. Okay?
The command center was formed in the Port Washington Fire Station, where authorities worked with volunteers to plan the urgent search for the ailing woman. If she didn't have her medicine soon, her condition could become critical. They had to find the grandmother before it was too late.
Report back here every 2 hours and let us know, okay?
Mrs. Loader was pretty well known in that area. It's a very good family. They're very highly thought of, and everyone was very concerned for her and felt obligated and really sincerely wanted to try to find her to help her.
Mounted reserve units geared up to comb rougher terrain on horseback. Local police and neighbors searched fields and woods for any trace of her or the missing car. Sheriff's deputies from a neighboring county brought in canine units hoping to pick up a scent. The Ohio State Highway Patrol ordered their aircraft to scan roads from above. The extensive search turned up no trace of Mrs. Loader or her car. Special collections were taken at restaurants and grocery stores to help pay for additional personnel. Deputies alerted the media while family members posted flyers in neighboring towns, hoping to get the word out beyond the local community.
Okay, thanks.
These gentlemen will help you. Hi.
That afternoon, a woman who knew Mrs. Loader called the sheriff's office with information and came in for an interview.
Appreciate you coming in.
You know, I heard about Mrs. Loader's disappearance.
She told investigators that she'd seen Mrs. Loader's red Buick in town at about 11 p.m. the previous evening. She thought it was strange that the ailing woman would be driving that late. Though the light was dim, she could see that a young man was driving the car.
Just kind of went
Bushy and thrown back.
not too bushy, not in
The witness tried her best to help a police artist construct a composite sketch from what she could remember of the brief encounter.
Is that him?
In the area surrounding Port Washington, Ohio, concern that a criminal could be on the loose spread fear in a community that was not used to locking their doors. Police showed the composite sketch at every interview, but no one could identify the man depicted in the drawing. The day ended with no new leads. On day 2 of Mrs. Loader's disappearance, a deputy entered her case into the NCIC the National Crime Information Center, a computer system linking 57,000 law enforcement agencies across the country.
Sheriff's Department.
That same day, the sheriff's office fielded a call from some concerned parents.
Can you describe him for me?
Their 16-year-old high school sophomore had also disappeared from Tuscarawas County.
Okay, his clothing, jeans.
In nearby Newcomerstown, 3 miles from the
Any
house where Mrs.
scars,
Loader
tattoos,
disappeared,
body marks?
a worried father and stepmother told a sheriff's deputy their son was missing. His family and his former employer had not heard from him for 3 days.
His red shirt. Do you have a picture of him?
Yes, I do.
One other thing too, officer.
A .22 caliber handgun was also missing from the house.
Is it silver?
The parents gave authorities a photograph of the missing boy, Eric Elliott.
It seemed kind of ironic at the time that we would have Mrs. Loader missing and that we would also have a juvenile reported missing within that short distance.
Ohio investigators wondered if there was any connection between the two disappearances from the same county. Just 36 hours after Mrs. Loader's abduction, Sheriff Wilson received another call.
Hello?
650 miles west in Fulton, Missouri, police found a red Buick stuck in a farmer's muddy field. When they ran its Ohio plates through the NCIC, they discovered it was Mrs. Loader's stolen car. The farmer had not seen who had abandoned it. The car's keys were missing, but the doors were unlocked. Among the items officers found inside was a green soda bottle and a sandwich wrapper labeled Goshen Dairy Store. They towed the vehicle to the station for further examination. Lieutenant Timothy Daimler from the Callaway County Sheriff's Office in Fulton, Missouri, was assigned to lead the investigation. His department's first task was to check the car's locked trunk.
We weren't sure exactly what we were going to find. We had a missing lady from Ohio, and this was her car, so we were under the assumption that very possibly we may find a body when we opened up the trunk.
Investigators needed to open it without damaging evidence or injuring the woman if she was unconscious inside. An auxiliary deputy who was a locksmith was called in. They discovered the trunk was empty. After 3 days of searching, hope of finding Mrs. Loader alive was beginning to fade. On September 1st, an FBI evidence recovery team from Kansas City was called in, since the missing woman's car had crossed state lines. Agents worked with local authorities processing Mrs. Loader's car for forensic details. They gathered several sets of prints and hairs. In Ohio, the foreign prints were entered into an automated fingerprint system, but no matches were found. Sheriff Wilson prepared to travel to Missouri. On a hunch, he took along a photo of the missing teenager, Eric Elliott.
At the time, it was nothing concrete as far as connecting Mrs. Loader's disappearance and Mr. Elliott's report of his son missing. However, I felt that since we're going to Callaway County, you know, it would make sense to maybe obtain a photograph of the missing juvenile and take with us.
Mrs. Loader's son-in-law joined the sheriff to help in the investigation.
See what we can do.
The Missouri official did not recognize the photo, but the Ohio sheriff did recognize the sandwich wrapper found in the car. It was from Goshen Dairy, a store near Mrs. Loader's house. Her son-in-law said the family kept her vehicle clean. Perhaps Eric Elliott, who also lived close to the store, had left the wrapper in the car.
They had a photograph of Elliott with them, and we decided to cover Kingdom City, which where they would have gotten off the interstate.
Ohio and Missouri investigators checked exits along nearby I-70, a major east-west route in the region. They hoped someone at the rest stops would be able to confirm that Elliott had been in the area. They spoke to dozens of employees and travelers. Late in the afternoon, their efforts finally paid off.
You ever seen him since then? No, I haven't.
They found one person who remembered seeing the teenager the day before. Unfortunately, authorities found no one who remembered seeing Mrs. Loader or her car. For the first time, investigators considered 16-year-old Eric Elliott as a suspect in her abduction. Missouri deputies also continued to canvass the rural Fulton area, inquiring if neighbors had seen anything unusual. At the house closest to the field where Mrs. Loader's car was found, an officer knocked on the door of an elderly couple, William and Flossie Brewer. He heard their dog, but the couple appeared to be out. Since their car was not parked outside, the deputy continued on. Authorities checked dozens of homes, but found no one close by who had seen Eric Elliott or Mrs. Loader.
I was on my way home. After finishing that up, I received a page from the communications center that they wanted me to call them immediately. They told me that they had found two bodies at a farmhouse out on County Road 147.
It was the home of William and Flossie Brewer, the house closest to the field where Mrs. Loader's car was found earlier that day. Authorities believe the two crimes were likely connected. 3 days after Mrs. Loader's disappearance, sheriff's detectives found the bodies of 86-year-old William Brewer and his 76-year-old wife Flossie in the basement of their home. Each had multiple gunshot wounds.
They were slumped over. They were near the door. She had her hands tied behind her back, with what appeared to be a telephone cord, and he was on her right, slumped over also, and his cane was standing there right beside him.
The detective also found the couple's dog faithfully guarding their lifeless bodies. An autopsy later determined that both Mr. and Mrs. Brewer had each been shot 3 times in the head with a .22, the same caliber weapon missing from Eric Elliott's home. The 16-year-old suspected in the disappearance of Mrs. Loader now became a suspect in the double homicide.
There was no indication that the suspect had spent any length of time in the house before this occurred, so from the evidence it pointed us that it had happened relatively quickly.
Investigators found no signs of forced entry. In the basement, the door to the outside was covered with cobwebs, indicating it had not been opened.
It was yesterday. Now,
investigators spoke with the Brewer's son. He said the couple's Oldsmobile was missing, along with several rifles.
Missing from around the house.
All were entered into the NCIC.
Yeah, the gun's missing and the car.
The son added that his mother's bedspread was also missing. Technicians worked the scene until 5 a.m. On the floor near the front entrance, investigators found 2 distinct sets of footprints foreign to the house.
Did they keep a key for this?
One appeared to be a tennis shoe, the other a hiking boot. Investigators suspected the double homicide was likely connected to Mrs. Loader's disappearance. What they didn't know was if 16-year-old Eric Elliott and a companion had become spree killers. By September 2nd, 1994, 4.5 days had passed since the ailing Ruth Loader was forced from her Ohio home without her medication. She was missing and presumed dead since her stolen car was found abandoned in Missouri, 150 yards from where police discovered a slain elderly couple. Authorities suspected an Ohio teenager named Eric Elliott and at least one companion were responsible for the crimes. But they had no direct evidence. Lieutenant Timothy Daimler of the Callaway County, Missouri Sheriff's Department recalled that citizens in the surrounding areas were stunned.
These are people that live in the rural community. They're used to leaving their doors unlocked. They do know everybody, and I think it was somewhat of a realization that, unfortunately, even though you do live in a rural community, that you still have to lock your doors and pay attention to when strangers are in your neighborhood.
With 2 confirmed homicides and a likely third in as many days, local authorities turned to the FBI for help. Special Agent Peter Christ of the FBI's Canton, Ohio resident agency was assigned the case. To catch up with the suspected spree killer and his companion, they needed an idea of where Eric Elliott might be heading.
So we were trying to get as much background information as we could. We were looking for relatives, uncles, aunts, cousins, friends. We were convinced that they were heading across the country, and we just needed to know everybody that there was a possibility that they would stop and visit, to either visit to say hello or get any kind of financial or moral support.
Can I call you TJ? Yeah, you seem like a nice enough.
Agents asked one of Eric Elliott's friends to come in for questioning. The friend told them that Elliott had recently become very close to a young ex-convict named Louis Gilbert. He said that Gilbert and Elliott had spent a lot of time together over the past few weeks. Both had been complaining about how boring life was in the small town and that there was no reason for them to stay. Gilbert was estranged from his wife and son, and Elliott wished to visit his birth mother in California.
I just got out of jail. Hello?
The friend added that the pair mentioned they wanted to do something that would make them go down in history and planned to start by stealing a car.
They mentioned that. We were drinking and got the talk.
The last time he saw them was 5 days ago, when Gilbert and Elliott were walking along railroad tracks behind Mrs. Loader's house.
Acting kind of strange, out of the ordinary.
Because Elliott was a troubled teen, Agent Christ believed that he probably looked up to 22-year-old Louis Gilbert, since Gilbert appeared to do as he pleased.
At the point when Gilbert befriended Elliott, he had been released from jail 2 weeks prior to that. Had a criminal history, had a history of getting in trouble. And at that point, we sort of felt that maybe Mr. Elliott was in awe or enamored with Mr. Gilbert because he did have that kind of criminal history background.
Investigators dug deeper into Louis Gilbert's past. The 22-year-old had served time for stealing a boat and breaking and entering. He had also been convicted of physically abusing his 3-month-old son. Though agents still lacked concrete evidence that Gilbert and Elliott were traveling together, they needed to find them as soon as possible to prevent any more killing.
Our biggest concern at this point was that we suspected these two of Mrs. Loader's disappearance. They were strong suspects in the killings and the double homicide in Missouri, and we were very concerned that this kind of activity would continue all the way across the country.
Sheriff Wilson's first step was to see if anyone had seen Gilbert with Elliott at the Goshen Dairy store, close to Mrs. Loader's Ohio home. Missouri investigators had found a sandwich wrapper from the store in Mrs. Loader's abandoned vehicle.
Does this look familiar to you?
Yeah. One of our wrappers to our sandwich.
The clerk identified the wrapper.
That you sell here at this store?
She also remembered selling the sandwich and some soda to Gilbert and Elliott just after Mrs. Loader disappeared. Authorities now had confirmation the young men were traveling together.
Thank you.
But 5 days had already passed since the spree killers had begun their cross-country rampage. The FBI quickly secured arrest warrants for kidnapping and burglary in the Ruth Loader disappearance. Though agents believed the pair was also responsible for the double homicide in Missouri, authorities still lacked evidence to formally charge them with those crimes. Agents weren't about to wait for someone to call in. Anticipating Gilbert and Elliott's westward movement, the FBI visited Gilbert's mother in Tahlequah, Oklahoma on September 3, 1994. The agent warned her that her son and his friend were armed fugitives, suspected of driving a stolen Oldsmobile with Missouri plates. It was possible that the pair would visit her for help.
I need to know if you've seen them recently.
Oh, they just left this morning.
This morning?
Yes.
The FBI had just missed them. Gilbert and Elliott had arrived at 2 a.m. the previous day. Gilbert claimed the Oldsmobile they were driving belonged to a friend. They said they were headed to California. The pair spent the day and left a few hours before the agent arrived. Cooperating with the FBI, she described the clothes the pair was wearing and gave agents addresses of other relatives. Authorities feared that if they didn't catch up with them soon, the spree killers would strike again.
That was one of the most frustrating things about this whole investigation. It just appeared that we were always a half a day or a day behind them. And that's probably one of the most frustrating things. We just couldn't get ahead of them.
Because Eric Elliott was a minor, investigators needed court permission to distribute his photo. They got the go-ahead 36 hours after the double homicide in Missouri. Lieutenant Daimler added it to the nationwide bulletins for the fugitives.
I was scared to see where they were going to end up next and who they were going to kill next. And I wanted to do everything I could to help get those people off the street, because it was apparent to me that they didn't care who they killed.
Despite the best efforts of authorities, the urgent hunt for the suspected killers stretched into its 6th day. On September 4th, 1994, 165 miles west of Gilbert's mother's house in Oklahoma, a dirt biker was riding the rural trails around Draper Lake, just outside of Oklahoma City. His ride was cut short when he discovered a woman's body amongst the trees. As he raced to summon police, he rode around an Oldsmobile with Missouri plates. Almost a week after Mrs. Loader's abduction in Ohio, the nationwide hunt for 2 suspected killers would continue. By September 4th, 1994, 6 days had elapsed in the FBI's massive nationwide search for a pair of suspected spree killers. Lewis Gilbert and Eric Elliott were wanted for a possible murder in Ohio and a confirmed double homicide in Missouri. The fugitives were last seen in Oklahoma, heading west. That same day, Oklahoma City police responded to a call from a dirt biker who had discovered a woman's body near Draper Lake. Officers secured the crime scene, then called in homicide detectives. They interviewed the biker who had made the discovery. Homicide Inspector Bob Bemo of the Oklahoma City Police Department was assigned the case.
Once we come upon the immediate scene where the body was located, I observed the young woman to be in a kind of a bent over backwards and caught between a tree.
The victim was a white female in her 30s. Investigators found no identification on or near the body. But a manager at a nearby marina later identified her as his missing employee, Roxy Rutter.
As a part of our investigation, another vehicle had been found a short distance away from where the victim had been located. And we didn't know if this was a part of the crime or not, although we did secure the area around this vehicle.
When detectives checked the Oldsmobile's Missouri plates with the NCIC, they discovered the car had been reported stolen from the Brewers, the double homicide victims from Missouri. Oklahoma investigators immediately notified authorities back east. To Tuscarawas County Sheriff Walter Wilson in Ohio, it appeared that Gilbert and Elliott had struck again.
They had recovered Missouri's stolen vehicle, and they also had another murder victim. It's just another terrible feeling that's really hard to describe, that obviously this tragedy continues.
Oklahoma police crime technicians gathered evidence from the vehicle. They recovered several unused .22 caliber bullets. A pawn shop receipt from a local Oklahoma City store was also found. Prints lifted from inside and outside the car matched both Gilbert and Elliott's. Oklahoma medical examiners determined that Ruddle's death had occurred in the last day or two, since there was little decomposition. Death had been inflicted by a .22 caliber weapon. detectives notified the woman's devastated husband. He informed them that her two-toned pickup truck was also missing. Investigators listed it as stolen and added its information to the growing NCIC report on Gilbert and Elliott. Detectives also took the receipt found in the brewer's car to the Oklahoma City pawn shop that issued it. 2 video games and a socket wrench set had been pawned the day before the murdered woman was found. They showed the receipt to an employee. He vaguely remembered Gilbert and Elliott, but he had something else that might be stronger than memory. The pawn shop was equipped with a 24-hour surveillance camera. The videotape confirmed his story. September 3rd was the last confirmed sighting of Gilbert and Elliott. The FBI issued 2 more warrants for the suspected killers for unlawful interstate flight. Agent Peter Christ and his team were frustrated that after 6 days, 4 victims, and thousands of man-hours, the killers remained a half day ahead of the FBI.
A lot of things were going through my mind. Number one, we didn't want another double homicide, and we didn't want another killing anyplace. And we were, I guess, what I kept thinking about, what have I not done? What lead have I not sent out? Let me look everything over again to see maybe if we can somehow get ahead of these guys instead of being behind them for a half a day or a day.
The nationwide hunt for Gilbert and Elliott intensified. Law enforcement agencies mobilized additional helicopters to search for Roxy Ruddle's two-toned pickup truck on routes heading west. Long-haul truck drivers were also notified to report any sightings on the road or at rest stops. Hundreds of calls poured into police in Oklahoma, Missouri, and Ohio.
Going to be a white male, 5'10", approximately 175 pounds.
But none led to the fugitives' immediate whereabouts.
Every time the phone rang, I was very concerned that it would be another body. And that's a terrible feeling when you're working a case like this, when you know what has happened up to that point and what you envision. The worst thing you can envision in your mind would happen is if this thing continued. So every time the phone rang and somebody said it was for me, that was my biggest fear. That was the first thing that came into my mind. Oh, we found another body.
The 2 suspected spree killers had chosen elderly people and women as their prey. And the FBI didn't know where or whom they would strike next. By September 5th, 1994, after a week of searching, the FBI and local law enforcement were no closer to finding 2 suspects in a killing spree that spanned 3 states. Agents believe that 22-year-old Lewis Gilbert and 16-year-old Eric Elliott were headed to the home of Elliott's mother in California, driving a stolen 2-tone pickup truck with Oklahoma plates. Missouri Lieutenant Timothy Daimler feared the murder suspects would kill again if they decided to steal another car as they traveled west.
I wasn't thinking serial killer at the time. I guess what was going through my mind at the time that was these guys didn't care who they killed, and I was thinking that we need to catch these people.
News reports and bulletins alerted people in western states that the suspected killers were headed their way, armed and dangerous. In New Mexico, State Police criminal agent Daniel Becker first heard about the fugitives through the media.
My initial thought was that the chances of them being apprehended in New Mexico were extremely slim because of the wide open spaces that we have and a relatively small amount of law enforcement that we have throughout the state.
The same day the reports began to hit the news in New Mexico, Gilbert and Elliott stopped at the rural home of an older couple 15 miles south of Santa Fe. They claimed that the stolen 2-tone pickup truck was low on gas. The couple agreed to help. The fugitives said they were on their way to California, but the woman was suspicious since she didn't see any luggage in the truck. To her, they seemed jumpy and left in a hurry when they heard the noise of nearby construction workers.
State Police, I'm afraid this is Carmen.
The woman reported the sighting to the New Mexico State Police. But by the time units arrived to investigate, the two young men were nowhere in sight. The following morning of September 6th, a New Mexico man reported another sighting to police.
How you doing?
He claimed to have seen Gilbert and Elliott the previous night. The man told the officers that he first encountered them while driving on Highway 599 outside Santa Fe. The motorist saw two young hitchhikers and pulled over to pick them up.
Hey, how's it going?
Thanks for picking us up.
They said their pickup truck had gotten stuck in the mud. He didn't realize who they were until he saw their photos on the news the next morning, describing them as suspected killers.
Want to know if they can get a ride to the mall?
The witness said he gave the pair a ride to the store where they bought food and gas. Later that night, he saw them again and drove them back to the place they had first met.
Hey, y'all drive safe, man.
It was a desolate part of the highway. The officer needed a landmark to estimate where the motorist had dropped the fugitives. The man said it was close to a small overpass. In the chance that the fugitives were still in the area, he alerted all area law enforcement. The New Mexico State Police were aware they had to move fast. Two units raced to the location to conduct a search for any trace of the suspected murderers. They found the overpass in a remote area. Reports had warned that the Ohio men were armed. Gilbert and Elliott would be tired and desperate after running and hiding for 7 days with little money. Officers prepared for the worst.
Probably leave contact cover, okay? Once we got him, we'll give you the signal.
If the fugitives were still in the area, they had miles of shrubs and hills behind which they could conceal themselves and take aim at anyone approaching.
Just wait there. Exactly.
Officers were instructed to use extreme caution.
So you guys go on the north side, we're going on the south side, okay? Good luck. You'll get my signal.
The team wanted to bring them back alive. They scanned the dust for footprints, food wrappers, and soda bottles. Anything that might indicate the suspected killers were still in the area. They approached one of 6 culverts underneath the highway. Carefully, they moved forward for a closer look. One officer spotted 2 men lying on the ground inside, apparently sleeping.
Hey, police! Put your hands up! Let me see your hands! Hands up! Put your hands up! Come up! Be smart! Put your hands up!
One of the startled men appeared to be groping for his gun in the dark. In the next split second, officers had to decide whether they needed to use deadly force to stop the suspected spree killers. On September 6, 1994, New Mexico State Police were within a few feet of murder suspects Louis Gilbert and Eric Elliott. The fugitives reached for their weapons, but chose not to die. After a murder spree that took the lives of 4 victims in less than a week, the pair was arrested without a struggle. The 1,800-mile chase had ended. FBI Special Agent Peter Christ got the news of their arrest in Ohio.
My reaction, of course, when I received that news was a tremendous sigh of relief. The first thing I wanted to know was, after they'd been caught, were there any bodies, were there any unsolved homicides close to where they were arrested? Of course, the answer was no. Just a tremendous sigh of relief that this whole thing was finally over.
Officers recovered a .22 handgun and a green soda bottle at the campsite where the pair were apprehended. They also found the bedspread belonging to the murdered Mrs. Brewer. State police found Roxy Ruddle's stolen pickup 2 miles away near a racetrack in Santa Fe. Like their other 2 stolen vehicles, the truck was stuck in the mud. Examining fingerprints, crime scene and lab investigators matched personal items to the murdered woman in Oklahoma City. Investigators also found another green soda bottle, the same brand they had found under the culvert and in Ruth Loder's car. Eric Elliott and Louis Gilbert were taken to the New Mexico State Police District Office in Santa Fe. If they could turn one against the other, their prosecution would be assured. 16-year-old Eric Elliott made one phone call to his father in Ohio and refused to say anything about the killings. Now it was Louis Gilbert's turn. The ex-convict waived his rights and agreed to be interviewed. New Mexico State Police criminal agent Daniel Becker had little time to prepare.
Gilbert revealed very little during the first hour of our interview about these killings. A couple times he made mention of, I asked him if he had did this out of, for some justifiable reason, or if he's a cold-blooded killer. And he responded by saying, one of those.
Gilbert claimed that he didn't recall what had happened over the past 5 days.
Did you murder him?
He refused to say anything about the murders or Mrs. Loder's disappearance. Frustrated, the investigator left the room. A few moments alone was all Gilbert needed.
After we had taken our first break, Gilbert began to open up a little bit more, and he actually made an admission that he had killed between 1 and 5 people. And when I had asked him why he'd killed people, he said, for stupid reasons.
Gilbert began by recounting the day he met the woman in Oklahoma. He said that he and Elliott struck up a conversation with Roxy Ruddle when they found her fishing alone in a secluded area of Draper Lake near Oklahoma City. They told her that their car was stuck in the mud and needed a ride back to town. She offered to help and packed up her gear. Her pickup truck was parked just up the hill.
Give me the keys. Get up. Now, come on, quick. Tie her up.
When her back was turned, Gilbert pulled the .22 pistol Elliott had taken from his parents' Ohio home. Then Gilbert told Elliott to tie Ruddle's hands. Gilbert said Ruddle cried and asked them not to hurt her. Elliott stayed behind while Gilbert marched Ruddle into the woods. He told her to sit down at the base of a tree. Then he shot Roxy Ruddle. Now that Gilbert had admitted to one murder, the agent pressed him on the others. He asked the confessed killer to describe what had happened in Missouri the day before he got to Oklahoma.
Gilbert advised me that they had been traveling through the state of Missouri, and the evening before the murders, they had parked the stolen vehicle that they had obtained in Ohio in what I was led to believe was a field. And they'd slept in the vehicle overnight, and the following morning or afternoon when they were about to leave, they realized the vehicle was stuck. So they needed to get another vehicle.
As Missouri investigators believed, Gilbert and Elliott had simply walked to the closest house and saw a car in the driveway. It was the home of Mr. and Mrs. Brewer. Gilbert decided they'd ask to use the phone to call for a tow.
Hello, sir. How you doing?
Oh, pretty good. We got our car. Thank you so much.
Wanting to help, the Brewers let the young men in.
Once inside, they learned that they didn't have a telephone book, so they couldn't come up with a number to call for a wrecker. And it's at that point that Gilbert told me that he decided, or they decided, that they were going to kill the Brewers.
Come on, move it.
They led the grandfather and grandmother into the basement.
Back to me. Keep going.
Then executed them. There was one more crime that Gilbert had not discussed.
Me and Eric were walking down some railroad tracks.
The elderly cancer patient from Ohio, Mrs. Loader, was still missing and presumed dead.
See if we could get the keys for it.
No one knew what had become of her. On the evening of August 29th, 1994, Lewis Gilbert and Eric Elliott approached Mrs. Loader's Port Washington home to steal her car. Since no one answered when they knocked, they believed the house was empty.
Stick it in. Cheap house. Stick it in.
So they broke in to search for the car keys.
Old lady.
After 10 minutes, they still hadn't found the keys. As they rummaged through the living room, they were startled when Mrs. Loader suddenly appeared. He claimed Mrs. Loader was still alive when he locked her in the trunk of her car and sped off.
They got about 4 miles outside of town in a wooded area, and they pulled up alongside of a guardrail and parked, got outside. Gilbert told me that he opened the trunk and he picked up Mrs. Loader out of the trunk, and they took her off the road near the guardrail, about 5 feet from the side of the road.
Gilbert said he forced Mrs. Loader to walk away from the car. He said he shot her with the same .22 that had killed the others.
We drove a little ways and
Gilbert had finished his description of the murders. But he hadn't told the agent where they could find the murdered Ohio woman.
We knew it was crucial to find Mrs. Loader's body, both as evidence, so this murder could be prosecuted, and also just simply as closure for the family, so that they could find her and make for proper arrangements for a funeral.
Gilbert gave authorities directions to find Mrs. Loader's remains. 50 people from the FBI and 12 different law enforcement and volunteer groups followed Gilbert's directions. They searched for the dead woman in fields and woods and hills for days. But the 79-year-old widow and mother of 4 was never found. Sheriff Walter Wilson continues to work the open case.
When you work a murder case, you almost become part of the family, so to speak, because your goal obviously is to solve the crime, to help the victims the surviving victims as much as you possibly can. It's something obviously that will never ever be forgotten. I have a high respect for the Loader family, having got to know them very well. I feel bad to this day that we've not yet been able to recover Mrs. Loader's remains.
16-year-old Eric Elliott stood trial as an adult in Oklahoma. Elliott was found guilty of first-degree murder for his participation in the killing of Roxy Ruddle. He was sentenced to life without parole. In Missouri, after 57 years of marriage, the Brewers were laid to rest. Unlike the family of Ruth Loader, the Brewer family was able to have some closure for their tragic loss. After being sentenced to death for the murder of Roxy Ruddle in Oklahoma, Lewis Gilbert was extradited to Missouri, where he stood trial for the murders of William and Flossie Brewer.
Lewis, where's Ruth? Where's the lady in Ohio? Where's Ruth, Lewis? Give her family a break.
He remained silent on the whereabouts of Ruth Loader's remains. Since the Ohio woman has not yet been recovered, there has been no trial date set to answer for her kidnapping and murder. For her family and friends, Gilbert and Elliott's actions are unconscionable.
I've often thought what goes through their mind or what causes them to do that, and I really, it's hard to understand or think what they're thinking, other than obviously they have to be very evil people.